The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. My name's Charles Christian and you're listening to another episode of the Weird Tales Radio Show. Janie, my co-host, will be joining us shortly, and we've got another packed show as we're starting to head towards the holiday season. We've got coming up a couple of pieces on Thanksgiving and an old ritual called Stir Up Sunday, which happens very soon. And we've also got some ghost stories, and you'll not be surprised to hear a few stories about witchcraft and wizardry and spells. But first, let's go on to Thanksgiving. Now, obviously, I'm in the UK, and we don't celebrate Thanksgiving over here because it's not a UK thing. But we do always have the view that it was when the Pilgrim Fathers, those who went on the Mayflower, when they celebrated their first survival of their first hard winter, when they landed in what was Plymouth Rock in present-day Massachusetts. And we all thought it was all about that, and how they survived the hard winter and how the Native Americans brought them foodstuffs, and it was Thanksgiving. But no, turns out it's not, because it is claimed that the first Thanksgiving actually took place 2 years earlier in the Berkeley 100, which is in Charles City County in Virginia, where an earlier group of settlers arrived, and they concluded with a religious celebration as dictated by the group's charter from the London Camp Company, which specifically required that the day of our ship's arrival at the place assigned in the land of Virginia shall be yearly and perpetually kept holy as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God. Ooh, so indeed, the rivalry between the good folk of Plymouth and those of the Berkeley 100 in Virginia got to such a point that, let me get it right here, in November 1963, President John F. Kennedy attempted to strike a compromise between the two regional claims, and coming up with a compromise that over 3 centuries ago our forefathers in Virginia and in Massachusetts, from home in a lonely wilderness, set aside a time of thanksgiving. On the appointed day they gave reverent thanks to their safety. However, there's more. There is claim that Spanish explorers were the first to have a religious service in the New World, and they were the ones who were in Texas in 1598, although there's an earlier claim that it was first celebrated in St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. It's claimed by some historians that the first Thanksgiving in North America actually took place in 1578 when Martin Frobisher from England landed there on his way looking for the Northwest Passage, which was basically the shortcut around the top of America to find China. Anyway, so all those things, but there's another angle to it, and it's got nothing to do with America. And it actually goes back to the Protestant Reformation in England during the reign of King Henry VIII. And one of the reforms made was to cut back the large number of religious holidays on the Roman Catholic calendar, which was then predominant. Before 1536, there were 95 church holidays plus the 52 Sundays of the year when people were required to attend church and forego work. That's the best part of half a year on having holidays. Anyway, the reforms in 1536 reduced the number of church holidays to 27, but some of the Puritans, who were the more extremist side of the reforming Protestants, they wanted to eliminate all church holidays, including Christmas and Easter. They wanted them replaced by specially called days of fasting or days of thanksgiving, in response to events that the Puritans viewed as acts of special providence. So, for example, unexpected disasters or threats of judgment on high called for days of fasting. These included battles that were lost, droughts, floods, outbreaks of plague, and the thought was these were all a result of mankind's sins, and so we'd fast for one day, i.e. not eat anything, as a penance. On the other hand, if things went well, then we'd have a day of thanksgiving. And so we had a big Thanksgiving following the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And there was also one following the failure of Guy Fawkes and his colleagues' gunpowder plot, an attempt to kill the king and blow up the House of Parliament. So, it actually traces back to a religious ceremony. And so, when it came back to when the Pilgrims and the early settlers arrived safely in New England and the Americas, they held Thanksgiving sessions. So there it goes. And here's a little bit more about it, and that's on the date of the Thanksgiving. Now, it appears that from the time of the Founding Fathers until the time of Lincoln, that's during the American Civil War, the war between states, the date of Thanksgiving was observed from state to state on various different days, although the final Thursday in November was the most popular date from the 19th century onwards, and eventually replaced an earlier holiday called Evacuation Day, which was a day commemorating the British exit from the United States following the Revolutionary War. Abraham Lincoln in 1863 tried to make it an official holiday to take place on the final Thursday in November, though obviously it was slightly disrupted by the war going on, and so it really didn't take off until the 1870s. And the next change came in October 1939 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt changed the holiday to the next to last Thursday in November, primarily for business reasons. 2 years later, he changed it again, so it changed from the last Thursday in November to the fourth Thursday in November, and that's where it's remained ever since. And of course, there's a slight irony in this because nowadays Thanksgiving is very much the start of the holiday season leading up to Christmas, which is the whole reason the Puritans first invented Thanksgiving, to try and do away with Christmas. I suspect they'd all be rolling in their puritanical graves to discover that the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, and the Monday following are the biggest days in the shopping calendar, and starting the whole move towards commercialisation, the commercialist nature of Christmas, and excessive consumer spending. So a little bit of irony. Anyway, next up we've got Janie with a little local angle on Thanksgiving. Now, earlier on in the show, I was talking about the background to Thanksgiving Day, and here's Janie, who's got a little local angle on it.
Yes, indeed. Just 4 miles down the road, maybe 5. We are celebrating the Mayflower, and there's so much going on in this little town just down the road. It's Mayflower 400. I'm not sure if it's a national celebration, but I think it is. But obviously we're doing our little bit here in this quiet corner of Norfolk. And obviously clearly it's to commemorate the voyage of the Pilgrim Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have long, long memories in this part of the world.
Oh, we do.
Which can sometimes go against you if you're not from around here. Can happen, but no. Anyway, we have 4 members of a Redenhall, which is as good as Halston, a split hairs family, who went to the New World seeking the religious freedoms. Mm-hmm. So our very own little people went forth. The Fullers, they were called.
They were indeed.
And anyway, so it's going to be a massive event in the town, and there's going to be all sorts of things. Well, what you're wondering. Yes, there's going to be... Well, first of all, let me tell you when it runs, from Thanksgiving 2019 to Thanksgiving 2020.
Yep.
And we, Halston, that's the... We of Halston, though we're not in Halston, but our little town, will contribute to the national launch on November the 28th by unveiling a huge mobile suspended from the roof of St John's Church. And what it's going to have is 400 origami boats coloured by the town's academy school children who will float off there. So I'm thinking it's inside.
I'm thinking it's inside. It's
origami.
It's going to be
winter.
some big kind of mobile type thing.
Yep. 400 there. And
because it's 400 years.
Yes, I guessed as much. I think everybody guessed me. Okay, what have we in store for this super event? A taste of traditional Thanksgiving food for the children will be prepared to accompany the November launch. So only children can have it, because I'd quite fancy some of that. I've always fancied having, was it pumpkin pie? Etc. Never had it. There'll be a Mayflower-themed treasure hunt around the town with prizes donated by local retail and other businesses between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Halston young farmers are going to sculpt a spectacular sailing ship from straw bales for display on the chicken farm's field. Stop it. Okay.
You're getting our readers too excited.
No, it'll be good. It doesn't sound good, but it really will be good. Anyway, but you must also keep your eyes peeled for other launch initiatives, and because there will be more.
Good.
Yeah. There's a lot of enthusiasm.
Yay.
There's going to be a follow-up meeting shortly to coordinate all the ideas. And maybe some people have got some new ones. Maybe people who might be being a little scoffing over there can come up with some ideas. And then, can't scoff then. Anyway, there's going to be a large community play, actually supported by the Halston players, and they are good. Mm-hmm. I have to say, very good. And the play will be in July, and it will be titled 1620, A New World Odyssey, written especially for the town. And it'll tell the story of Edward and Samuel Fuller and the other families who crossed the ocean and the people they met when they arrived on America's eastern seaboard. So there'll be some street theatre.
Oh, a bit of mime. Will there be some mime?
It could be, yeah. Clowns, possibly. Anyway, everybody's invited to join in and help. Actors, singers, costume, prop makers, organisers, local history researchers, etc., etc. So if you want more details, you'll have to contact me. I've got the email, etc., like that. But just a little bit more information here.
This is about the Fuller family.
This is the Fuller family, yes. So there was, and there still are obviously Fullers around here, I imagine, related. There must be. And over in the US, I believe. So it was a Dr. Samuel Fuller, his brother Edward, and Edward's wife and son, who was another Samuel, known as Samuel Fuller Jr. There's 2 L's, by the way, who sailed with the Pilgrim Fathers on Mayflower to the Plymouth colony in what is now Massachusetts, 400 years ago in 1620. So the 2 brothers were both originally born and raised in Redenhall, which is part of Halston, and baptised at St Mary's, though they subsequently moved to Holland, actually, to pursue their religious beliefs. For this reason, they're apparently described as being among the saints on the Mayflower voyage, as distinct from the strangers, namely other passengers and crew. So I suppose that means they were very religious.
Yeah.
Sadly, neither Edward or his wife, whose name is not known in history, or recorded in history, did not live, I say, through that first winter in America. So that was Ed and his wife. But Dr. Samuel did survive, as did his nephew Samuel, and went on to become a respected church deacon and physician within the community. And the Fullers are apparently one of 25 families of Mayflower passengers known to have descendants in North America today, as I said earlier. So there's our little connection to the whole thing locally.
Thank you. That was lovely.
You're welcome.
We haven't had any seasonal ghost stories recently, so let's make amends with a couple here I've found that relate to November. The first one takes place in November. It's a recurring haunting on the 19th November, and it is at Summer Leighton here in Norfolk. And it is said the area was once the hunting ground of a giant, and the giant discovered a plot to murder him. So he struck first and killed the would-be assassin, and now it is said the assassin's blood is said to rain down from the sky on the 19th of November, which at the time of recording this is tomorrow, so I'll have to see whether it rains. And then, what else have we got? Oh, the Black Coach of Enfield, which is on the outskirts of London. Precisely, it's a Bell Lane. And this is another popular story, and it tells of a phantom coach that runs along at least 2 metres off the ground where the road once lay, which is a bit odd because normally roads are higher over the years rather than lower. Anyway, it's been seen several times in the 20th century, although last time it was seen was in November 1961. And it said that as the ghostly carriage goes by, the passengers can be quite clearly seen inside. And a 14-year-old schoolboy who was cycling on his way back from Albany Park School claims that he cycled through the apparition, which is a good story to tell when you get back from school. Sorry, Mom, the ghost ate my homework. We'll have more ghost stories in the next show. Right, we're off into another of our little forays into witchcraft history, in particular witch trials. Now, you will read on Wikipedia, which tells you immediately you need to take it with a pinch of salt, that the last execution for witchcraft in England took place in 1716 when a Mary Hicks and her 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth were hanged for witchcraft. They apparently caused storms at sea by taking their stockings off. However, the pamphlet that talks about this, published in 1716, is generally believed to be totally spurious and was really launched as a way of generating support for the clerics who still believed that witchcraft was a thing and that it should still be persecuted, whereas the courts were starting to become more lenient and take the view that these witches don't really exist, so we're certainly not having them hanged. So that then leaves us to who was the last witch? Well, Jane Wenham takes the credit because she is generally reckoned to have been the last person condemned to death for witchcraft, although her conviction was subsequently set aside, and she was tried in 1712. So let's have a look at the background of it. At the time she was brought to trial, she was 70 years old. She was reputed to be a wise woman, but she also had a bad reputation. She'd been married twice, but appeared to have been deserted by her second husband, who sent a word around Hertford, where she lived, with the town crier to say he had separated from her. However, not long afterwards, in 1699, he died, and her neighbours began to suggest that his death had been brought about by Jane's use of witchcraft. Her first husband had also met with a suspicious and unpleasant death. He died in November 1696, and within a couple of months Jane went on to marry her second husband, the one who eventually separated from her before dying. She married him just 3 months after she'd buried her first husband. So there was a lot of rumour about it. Anyway, things came to a crunch in early 1712 when Matthew Gilson, a farm labourer working for a John Chapman, was asked by Jane for a handful or two of straw so that she could sell to straw platters, people who made things out of straw. She'd asked him once before, and he'd refused her request, and she asked him again, and he again refused her request. She walked away, muttering as she went, whereupon Matthew reportedly said he came over all strange and compelled to run to a nearby farm and collect straw from a dung heap. Not surprisingly, his employer, John Chapman, was incensed by this apparent bewitching of his farmhand, and having long been suspicious that Jane had been bewitching his livestock, he publicly heaped abuse and threats on her and accused her of being a witch and a bitch. Ooh, they didn't mince words then. Jane, who seems to have been rather feisty, a bit like Jane on this show, then went to see the local magistrate, a Sir Henry Chauncey, and brought a charge of defamation against the farmer and asked for protection. So it's kind of ironic that Jane herself rather initiated the events leading to her trial. Sir Henry discussed the matter with the Reverend Godfrey Gardiner, the local vicar. This is in the village of Walkern, where Jane lived, and he suggested that Chapman award Jane with 1 shilling as compensation for the defamation, and also advise her to be less quarrelsome. But Jane wasn't very happy with this and left angrily, saying she would have justice some other way. Words that would be misconstrued and later used against her. How so, you ask? Well, what happens next is the vicar's servant maid at the parsonage started to behave in a most unaccountable manner, and it was alleged that Jane had bewitched her to show her dissatisfaction at the way she'd been treated. So, once again, Sir Henry Chauncey comes in, and a warrant is now obtained for her arrest on a charge of witchcraft, and Sir Henry directed 4 women to search her for witch marks, but she didn't have any. Nothing was suspicious. Rather than be sent to jail, the witch, this is Jane, offered to submit herself to the swimming test. As an alternative, another vicar in the neighbouring parish suggested she try to repeat the Lord's Prayer. It generally believed that if you were a witch, you couldn't say the Lord's Prayer. And lo and behold, she repeated it incorrectly and subsequently confessed that she was a witch. Then she was sent to Hertford jail to wait the next assize court, where she was tried in March, this is March 1712, by Judge Sir John Powell. The lawyers refused to draw up the indictment for any other charge other than conversing with the devil in the form of a cat, and despite the leading of the judge, who when it was suggested that the prisoner could fly, remarked, "There's no law against people flying," the jury found her guilty, and so she had to be sentenced to death. Powell, however, intervened and obtained a pardon for her. Now, this caused a huge outrage. If there'd been social media, Twitter would have been trending crazily with Wenham witch. Anyway, there was much demonstrations, lots of pamphlets, and it's generally believed that the Mary Hicks pamphlet was part of the propaganda battle to try and show that this was all wrong and that witchcraft was still a big issue and judges shouldn't treat it so leniently. What happened next was she was pardoned by Queen Anne and subsequently moved away from the village for her own safety, and eventually is last heard of living in a cottage in another part of Hertfordshire under the patronage of William Cooper, the first Earl Cooper, who was a Whig aristocrat, and she was subsequently buried in an unmarked grave at Hartingford Bury. And I say, it is suggested that the whole thing by then had become very political and was a dispute between the Tories, which in modern-day England would be the Conservative Party, who were still pro-hanging, and the Whigs, who'd be the modern-day Liberal Democrats, who went for a more enlightened view. So there you have it. The last woman to be convicted and sentenced to death for witchcraft in England, but she was pardoned and so did not hang.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian.
We haven't had any spells or practical magic for a while, so let's remedy that now. And as requested, no tinklies. Right, we're going to deal with hexes. I know you've all been wanting me to cover this since the 2 years we started. It's the exciting stuff, isn't it? Oh yes, putting hexes on people or fighting off people who put hexes on you. Anyway, before we do that, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of spells for dealing with hexes, we're going to look at the essential ingredient, which is a thing called war water, as in war. What is it good for? Well, sometimes called iron water or the water of Mars. And you can use war water to gain protection, to reverse a curse, or even to place a curse. So, start by placing some iron nails in a mason jar. These are sometimes called glass canning jars, preserve jars, or screw top jars, or you can even use those spring top jars. They have the big rubber seal on them to make a nice airtight seal. Now, the nails you want, recommended, basically any nails will do, but the cut iron nails, the old-fashioned type angular nails, or the type of nails farriers use for shoeing horses, because they rust easily, they are the recommended ones, and you can buy cut iron nails from hardware shops. Now, to really add a little potency, delicately prick the end of your finger, thumb preferably, just so there's a tiny, tiny little bit. Don't go mad, don't impale your finger. Just a little tiny bit of blood on the end of the nails. Put the nails into the jar and cover with water. Good, clean water will do. Tap water, fine. Spring water, even bottled spring water. As pure as possible. And just enough water to cover the nails and leave it undisturbed until the rust begins to form. You probably want to keep the jar shut, but maybe open it periodically just to encourage the oxidation. It'll take 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 to 10 days. And once the rusting process begins, just add more water. So you've got it topped up, Then keep it in a refrigerator or a cool area, cupboard under the stairs, a cellar. And it's been suggested that once you've got the war water starter going, you can just, even if you use some of the water, you can just top it up with fresh water. Now this is the standard protective war water. Now if you want to really go for the supercharged version, which is called malevolent war water, you don't use spring water, you collect water from a fierce thunderstorm. And you add the rusty nails, but you also add a bit of powdered sulphur and some of your own urine. So definitely a strong concoction. So what do you do with it? Well, with the general purpose protective, you can use it as an antidote if you think somebody's put a hex on you or a curse on you. Quite simply, pour off some of the water, strain it so there's no bits of rust in it, and on a morning when you've still got an empty stomach, drink the water, and the iron water will protect you. There's another variation of it to break a hex, and that is you add the war water to your bath water, and then you soak in it and you contemplate what is happening to you and how you'd like your life to improve. Now, that's protecting yourself against somebody else's hex. Another variation is a reversal spell, where you aim to send the spell, the hex that's on you, back at the person who's put the hex on you. To do this, pour out some of your war water and boil some pins or nails in it. And then, once it's cooled down and you've strained away the solid material, the pins and nails, you take that container of liquid, the war water, and you throw it at the home of the person who's placed the spell at you. Sling it on their front door, on their doorstep. Throw it on their car, whatever. That's a reversal. And of course, as mentioned, you can use it malevolently to place your own hexes. Now, before we go any further, we must obviously give the warning, the threefold law, or law of return, which is really the Wiccan, occultist, pagan version of karma. And this states that whatever energy a person puts out into the world, be it positive or negative, it'll be returned to that person 3 times over. So if you place a curse on somebody, there's a good chance it will bounce back on you 3 times over. But, say, if you got yourself into an aggressive situation and people have been throwing curses at you, you've protected yourself against them, you tried to reverse them, you may want to go onto the offensive. And it's also worth pointing out, quite a lot of people say that the threefold rule doesn't actually apply. I'll leave that to your own judgment. So, how do you do it? Right. This is the bottle hex. Obtain a bottle with ideally a screw top. A small medicine bottle will do, glass bottle. Place your target's photograph inside the bottle. Write the target's name on a piece of paper and put that inside the bottle as well. Now put holly and ivy into the bottle, as much as you can wedge in. And then add some black ink and war water. And obviously this would be the malevolent war water that is based on water gathered in a thunderstorm rather than the more easygoing. Fill it full of the war water, then seal the bottle shut and bury it upside down. Now, ideally, you bury it upside down on that person's property or somewhere near where they pass. But that might not be possible, but nearby will do. So there you go. That's war water, all you need to know. How to use it to protect yourself, how to reverse spells, and how to place spells. And here's Janie with some culinary advice.
Well, yes, because it's that time of year again. Ho, ho, ho. I am a bit of a Grinch, as you will probably notice. So anyway, Christmas and the holiday season is what I'm talking about. And, of course, it all starts at Thanksgiving time in the US, and it now runs through till the 12th of August. No, not 12th of August, 12th night.
12th of August is when the Christmas decorations start appearing in shops.
I'm quite tired. I was awake at 2. Bear with, don't judge. Anyway, so this is a retailer's season of joy, as we know. Mm-hmm. However, sad news, there's a tradition that's been going for several hundred years. It's been allowed to lapse, right? Mm-hmm. And the date we're looking at is obviously November, and November the 24th specifically, right? That is the date of Stir Up Sunday, which is technically the last Sunday before Advent. And it's November the 22nd in 2020, in case anybody wants to revive this wonderful tradition. So, Stir Up Sunday, what is that, you ask?
I do. What is that?
A gog, aren't you? It's a name which was derived from wording of a church prayer in the 1549 Book of Common Prayer, and said on that day, which begins with the words, "Stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord, the wills of thy faithful people." So that doesn't kind of make a lot of sense, but that's just to show that it is a proper thing, is a thing. And the words date back to at least the 1830s, if not even earlier, as this was the day on which people would begin to prepare their Christmas puddings by mixing them together, all the ingredients, which we know what they are. Well, I should think most people know what they are. Are they a fairly international culinary treat, Christmas puddings? Don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway, fruit and wheat and glassy cherries, bits of peel, but lots of sultanas and raisins and nice things in there as well. Yes. So they would, that's the day they would start preparing them. Which is quite a long time, really. But I think there's so many, things like raisins and currants, etc. None of it goes off, so they could mix it all together prior to cooking it all, which was traditionally done by boiling and steaming. Sorry, you wish to speak?
I was going to say, I think it was done in advance.
Oh yes,
and then it was allowed to sort of.
Yes,
ferment or settle.
Yes, I'm just remembering, my grandparents, they would store it and mature it for 4 weeks. So they'd cook it.
Cloth things, and then they'd either cook it again or cook it into slices or do whatever. Yes. Yeah,
and then reheat it on Christmas Day. But apparently, actually, you see, this is the reason for this, because it's kind of folklore-y, along with the purely culinary activity of stirring up the ingredients, Stir Up Sunday also became associated with a number of good luck rituals, of which I do remember. I'm so old, I do remember some of those. One tradition is not just whoever is preparing the pudding would stir it, but also every member of the household, including the children and their servants, if they had any. Which, of course, they probably would, because this was in the 19th century. And even quite lowly people would have had perhaps a scullery maid, kitchen maid or something. And they would all of them take turns in stirring the pudding mixture and making a secret wish, just with the stirring. That's a good old way to get that really quite hard, tough and stodgy, dry pudding mixed, isn't it?
It is.
It's clever.
Yes, it is, yes.
Anyway, They might also say this rhyme while they were stirring. And it goes like this. Stir up, we beseech thee, the pudding in the pot, and when we get home, we'll eat it, all hot. Yep, so that was what they did. But it was also believed that Christmas puddings should be prepared with 13 ingredients, including dried fruit and spices, representing, 13 ingredients, would represent Christ and the 12 apostles, and that every family member stir it in turn from east to west. So that would be anti-clockwise, or the old word, which I love, widdershins, to honour the Magi and their journey from the east. Yeah.
They travel from east to west.
Absolutely. However, there's more.
Yes.
Yeah. Another widely observed custom was to add good luck tokens to the mix. Typically, these would be a silver coin or even several coins. So we're talking pre-decimalisation in the UK, which was 1971. It would have been a silver threepenny bit. That's 3 old penny bit. Or a sixpence, which were tiny, tiny little silver coins, which was half a shilling. Which nobody's got any idea what that is anymore.
Or 1/20th of a pound.
Yes, the average weekly salary that was. And many families, I think both of us actually, did keep coins back just for the purpose of putting them in Christmas puddings, because if you found one in your portion of pudding on Christmas Day, you were guaranteed good fortune for the coming year.
Assuming you didn't break your tooth on it.
Yes, well, I always used to think, I might have been slightly prissy as a young child. I always used to think it was a little bit unhygienic. And didn't Grandma wash it properly before she put it in there?
I know, yes. I do recall my parents using those brass threepenny bits, the ones with
yes,
the
yeah, they
corners
always
on.
had deep etching on, so all the gunge got...
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, but you might also find a silver thimble for thrift, or even a tiny wishbone symbolising luck. I imagine that was a silver wishbone, not some bit of old meat.
Bit of old broiler.
Yes, these were, as you would obviously imagine, slightly less health and safety conscious times. But nowadays, people are more aware of the risk of choking or breaking a tooth, which wouldn't be specifically good luck at all, would it? I don't know, unless you went to a dentist and he was gorgeous and you fell in love with the dentist, because they earn a lot of money,
They do.
And there you are, you fall in love, marry a dentist, live happily ever after. So it could have been good. It's the way life turns, isn't it? Anyway, sadly, because relatively few people now prepare their Christmas puddings from scratch, which you may be aware, preferring instead to buy ready-made ones from shops, with obviously very good reason, because I remember the boiling and steaming process took hours and hours. Yeah. And the kitchen would be dripping with suety stalactites.
Yes.
Ugh. Yeah, well, there was soot in there as well, wasn't there?
There was soot in there,
yeah.
yes, as a body of it.
Anyway, so unfortunately, Stir Up Sunday and its traditions are being forgotten, which did make me wonder, because obviously, as you know, I'm a slightly cynical person, that all the traditions that are being revived that we didn't have in our day, we had birthday, if you were lucky, and Christmas, if you were lucky. That was it. Nothing else. You had a guy on bonfire night, yeah, but that was about it. So this has been allowed to lapse, but is it, I wonder? Food retailers are smart to spot that, of course, this would be like a turkey voting for Christmas, wouldn't it? Because, now, bear with me, if people start making their own non-convenience puddings, they'd be much cheaper than buying their ready-made ones. Yeah. Just a thought.
Yes.
That's
Thank you,
all I
Janie.
have to say.
Thank you very much. Now, last week, Janie and I went off to Wenham Church. It's a church nearby us here in South Norfolk to have a evening's torch-lit peering of the church walls to look for medieval graffiti. These are the strange symbols that are scratched onto the stonework of old churches. Now, the church itself, very old church, currently dedicated to St Andrew, but it was built on the site of the now ruined St Mary's Priory. So the history goes way, way back. Now, what we were particularly interested in are what are called compass-drawn designs. These are a circle, quite clearly drawn with a compass-type divider, because there's a little pointy bit in the middle. It's a circle, and sometimes they are elaborated on with internal further circles and decorative effects. Now, one of the things that people have been pondering over the years, when it became apparent that these compass-drawn designs weren't just one-offs, but they were to be found not merely in lots of churches, but frequently in great numbers within the same church. Now, it was originally thought that these compass designs may have been made by the architects who built them, that it was some kind of marking their territory, or they were left over from the design work that the architect was doing, or some kind of symbol to show a particular architect had worked on it. But again, it became apparent that the way they were placed and located and hidden, they were too small to be done by architects. They had no architectural significance, even if the architect had been showing his apprentices how to do it. They wouldn't make so many of them. And it's now become realised that these are protection marks, and they were made by members of the congregation when they were there in church. They are called sometimes apotropaic designs, to fend off evil. Some other names for them are witch marks, and they've been found all over the place. Now, this sort of prompted a further question, that very few medieval dividers, compasses have ever been found. So what were people using for them? Well, the latest thinking, and I'm indebted for this book, Matthew Champion, on medieval graffiti, the lost voices of England's churches. Anyway, it's thought that they were actually drawn using not a compass, but a pair of small shears or scissors. The shears were made from one piece of metal and sprung, and if you pointed one end and stuck one end in the stone, you would be able to inscribe circles from it. And so it was an instrument that everyone would have had access to, and some of the medieval manuscripts quite clearly show women going about their business with a pair of shears attached to a cord hanging round their waist. So why did they do it? Well, I say it appears to be two reasons. One, just general protection, in the sense of protecting against evil. If you create the elaborate pattern, the theory was any evil lurking around, and we have to get into the medieval mindset here, that people really did believe that there was a devil out there waiting for them to drag them off to hell if they did anything wrong. If you created these little elaborate patterns within the circle of a compass, any evil spirits would get trapped in there and be able to be unable to find their way out. The other reason was to do with baptism, because most of the marks have been found either upon or nearby where the baptismal font is located. And even today in some Christian churches, there is a habit of leaving either the north door, sometimes called the Devil's Door, open so that any evil spirit can leave the building unhindered and not lurk there when the baptismal water is put on the child and drives away any evil spirits to have been found in the baby. And some also have little windows high up which are left open during baptism, again to allow evil spirits to get out. And so it's thought that the reason these little hex foil compass designs were so frequently around the baptismal area, it was thought that there was this moment between the baby going into the church and being baptized and coming out from the baptism. There was this moment where they could still be exposed to evil. So just to ensure that there was maximum protection, these little circles were carved. Was it pagan? Well, no, because this was, as I've just mentioned, an era where people were concerned the devil was a real creature, and while the church could offer its protection via prayer and ritual and ceremony, the parishioners could enhance it with their own defences, and these compass-drawn designs were one aspect of the defence. So, next time you're in an old English medieval church, have a look by the pillars, have a look also in the porch, the doorway to the church, to see what's there. And you'll be intrigued to see how many of these little symbols you'll find. Happy medieval graffiti hunting. And that's it. We're almost out of time again. However, before we go, obviously, dark nights now in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously, if you are listening in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's cold and miserable, and that time where it's nice to curl up in front of a fire, reading an old ghost book or a horror story, something to chill the blood. There's something about it. I always find Christmas is very spooky. And I've been reading a bit of H.P. Lovecraft as my nocturnal reading. And I just like to read a little bit from the end to end on a suitably spooky and grim note. And this is from the Lovecraft short story, The Statement of Randolph Carter. And basically, Carter is explaining the disappearance of his companion, Harley Warren, who he knew was experimenting in the occult and had found a mysterious book that said that in this particular ancient graveyard located in the Big Cypress Swamp, there was an underground passage and stairways between the surface world and the underworld through which demons could travel. Anyway, Carter and Warren head off to this graveyard. It's very spooky. And taking a lantern, Warren heads down some stairs they find beneath an old tomb. And he communicates with his companion, that's Carter, with a field telegraph system or telephone. So basically, they've got loudspeakers at each end of a wire. And off he goes. And then suddenly, after several minutes of silence, Warren suddenly begins to make panicked outbursts and shouts out that Carter must flee, Carter must escape. There's something terrible down there. Then it all goes quiet. So we just read the final bit. After that, Mrs. Carter was talking, there was silence. I know not how many interminable aeons I sat stupefied, whispering, muttering, calling, screaming into that telephone. Over and over again through those aeons I whispered and muttered, called and shouted and screamed, Warren, Warren, Answer me. Are you alive? And then came to me the crowning horror of all. The unbelievable, unthinkable, almost unmentionable thing happened. I have said that aeons seemed to elapse after Warren shrieked forth his last despairing warning, and that only my own cries now broke the hideous silence. After a while, there was a clicking in the receiver. I strained my ears to listen. Again I called out, "Warren, are you there?" And in answer, I heard the thing which has brought this cloud over my mind. I do not try, gentlemen, to account for that thing, that voice, nor can I venture to describe it in detail, since the first words took away my consciousness and created a mental blank which reaches to the time of my awakening in hospital. Shall I say the voice was deep, hollow, gelatinous, remote, unearthly, inhuman, disembodied? What shall I say? It was the end of my experience. It is the end of this story. I heard it and knew no more. Heard it as I sat petrified in that unknown cemetery in the hollow, amidst the crumbling stones and the falling tombs, the rank vegetation and the miasmal vapours. Heard it well up from the innermost depths of that damnable open sepulchre, as I watched amorphous, necrophagous shadows dance beneath an accursed waning moon. And this is what the voice said.
"You fool! Warren is dead."
And so, on that light note, it just remains for me, Charles Christian, to say thank you very much for listening. Until the next time, stay well, stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, witchcraft, magic and folklore. You can keep in touch with us online at www.weirdtalesradio.com, by email to weirdtales@icloud.com, and on Twitter @ChristianUncut. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Good night.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.